Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
I'd like to call this informational meeting of Tuesday, June 14th, 2022 to order. Our first order of business, as we always do, is committee reports. I attended the CCOG meeting last week. I'd like to report they're in great financial shape, review the audit, and approve that for the next year, along with budgeting. Some new faces down there as things change, but rest assured that CCOG is moving forward at a great pace. Lynn Keller Forbes is moving houses as fast as she can possibly get that done. Other council remarks at this time? Councilor Neitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last night I was able to see the newly renovated Tuthill House. I know some other city councilors were able to go as well. Alex Hallbeck of the Board of Historic Preservation did a fabulous job with the presentation about the history of the house, the process to restore it, and he recognized a lot of the people that made it happen. The city council, a few years back, we did vote not to surplus the property, so that was our small contribution to the project, so we should be proud of that. But really where all the credit, most of the credit lies is with all of the private individuals, the donors, the businesses that contributed a lot of funds and a lot of in-kind support to make it happen. Most notably, Kathy English and Margaret Blomberg, who are from the neighborhood. They worked tirelessly to raise funds, and they raised way more than what was actually originally the goal was, and they raised $350,000, and it looks beautiful on the inside and out. They renovated the entire upstairs. Contractor named Beach Construction was the contractor, did a really good job, and among others that probably should be recognized, and I'm going to miss some people, would be the Board of Historic Preservation, the other citizens that were on a working group that worked on the project and made decisions such as what exactly to do as far as the renovation and had to work that through. Former Councilor Brecky was a big passionate advocate of the project, and I know she was involved. The Parks Department assisted with it, and of course they're going to maintain it going forward. And then Diane DeCoyer, who's the liaison for the Board of Historic Preservation, really a passionate advocate for the city of Sioux Falls, one of our city employees for historic preservation. I know she gave a lot of personal time and was a helper for that board. So she deserves a lot of credit. So if you can, anyone in the public can go check it out, and they should, from 6 to 8 o'clock tonight or tomorrow from 11 to 1. It's really something to see. It's really beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you. Other council remarks? Seeing none, let's jump into our first presentation, Landscape Golf Management Contract Amendment. Don Kearney.
Afternoon, councilors. Don Kearney with Parks and Rec. Appreciate the opportunity to present amendment to Landscapes Management Golf Management Contract today. As a reminder where we've been on this particular issue, Sean helped me with some of these items as it relates to the liquor licensing changes. Back in April, the council adopted the state guidelines allowing the city to issue liquor license to municipally owned golf courses. And then back on May 10th, as required by ordinance, council passed a regulation to allow the city to set aside 2 liquor licenses for our courses. Now we're here tonight before you to amend the management agreement to recognize ownership of the liquor licenses by the city's golf course operator. And the current contract with Landscapes already allows for and addresses beer and wine, but it's silent on the liquor licenses. And so it does add language regarding that. And then this is very similar to the arrangement we have with Spectra out at the Premier Center. Some of the benefits from our perspective and Landscape's perspective, you know, they regularly receive requests for the opportunity to have liquor at tournaments and events. You know, our current courses, most courses in the area have a liquor license. And so when an event tries to book with Landscapes, unfortunately they choose to go elsewhere because of the lack of that license. You know, for example, City of Brandon has one and it's not uncommon for cities to have a liquor license. And then the other thing is that generally they get requests for this from their patrons for that option. The other thing it does is it increases our profitability of our courses. Obviously, that helps us to be able to fund operations and capital improvements. It reduces the risk for us to be able to have to subsidize the courses in the future, and it diversifies our revenue streams, which is always a positive thing. Some of the proposed changes and the key changes that I'd like to highlight include the fact that there will be 2 separate liquor licenses, one for Elmwood and one for Prairie Green. The licenses are acquired from the city at the same cost as a private operator would acquire them at, and then it would be funded through the Landscapes operating account that they operate on our behalf. One of the questions we looked at was if we were to purchase these licenses for Elmwood and Prairie Green, how does that put us from a financial perspective, from reserves, being able to do capital projects? And I'm pleased to say that despite the purchase of these licenses, we'll still have ample reserves for those capital projects and operating reserves. All the licenses will also be held by Landscapes' name, but know that at the end of this agreement, Landscapes must transfer the license at no cost to the city or the succeeding manager if Landscapes doesn't happen to be the golf course manager. As it relates to the financial reporting, Tom Huber, Sean Pritchett, and the accountants from Landscapes all conferred regarding how this should be treated, and the amendment shows that it would be defined, the liquor license would be defined as an other asset for the purposes of financial reporting. And then similar to other capital expenditures, the acquisition costs and any book market value adjustments of the liquor licenses are excluded from calculating the incentive fee that Landscapes gets. The other thing, just to remind everybody, especially new counselors, the incentive fee is based on net operating income, and so that'll work well as it relates to their current financial incentives. However, annual renewal costs for the liquor licenses are treated like an operating expense. So going forward, we will be before the Parks and Rec Board tomorrow afternoon seeking their recommendation to the City Council. And then on June 21st, we will process a resolution amending the golf course management agreement with the outlined stipulations that I've gone through. And then subject to your approval in July of the liquor license applications by Landscapes, Landscapes think they'll be able to start using that license on or around September 1st of this year. So Justin Arlt, our market manager with Landscapes, is here with us today, and would certainly be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Council questions? I know we've rolled this around quite a bit. I see no questions. You did a very thorough and expedient job. Thank you very much. Move on to our next presentation, community engagement process and benchmarking study.
Again, good afternoon again. So City Council members, we have a couple professional services contracts that you'll be seeing on your council consent agenda. And one of them involves hiring Pros Consulting. They were the firm that did our comprehensive plan for us. And we want to hire them to help facilitate the community engagement process, not unlike what the school district did with some of their major facility improvements they did a few years back. And then we also have a benchmarking study that we would like to walk you through as well. And while they're somewhat related, we wanted to cover both at the same time so that when you saw it on the consent agenda, you know what both of those consulting services agreements are for. So as it relates to the Quality of Life Bond 3, I know we've talked about this quite a bit over the years, but just for the community's benefit and for your benefit if you get questions going forward. The Quality of Life Bonds includes the replacement of Frank Olson Pool. It includes the replacement of Keene Park Pool. It includes the replacement of McKenna Park Pool. And then we also would like to do some enhancements to Terrace Park and Laurel Oak. And it also includes the clubhouse and cart storage building at Elmwood. The other thing I'd mentioned with Frank Olson and Keene Park, like we saw with Spellerberg, is that when you're making a significant change to the facility in that particular park, there are other dominoes that kind of fall, realizing that, you know, tennis courts may have to move, you know, there may just have to be some remaster planning of the entire space as it relates to Keene Park and with Frank Olson, primarily because the footprints are a lot larger than they were back in the day. And so there's going to be some modifications to the actual park master plans as well, and just wanted you to know that. So in July, we hope to start this community engagement process where really seek out input from the neighborhoods. We'll be doing community-wide meetings as well to really get the feedback. And Mike will go through a little bit more detail on exactly how that's going to work. But overall, we'll start in July and hope to finish up by the end of the year. We'll do master planning in 2023 and then design it, and that would carry on into 23 and 24, because as you can see, construction staggered over 2024 to 2026, and that's intentional because we're trying to avoid having 3 pools shut down at once, and want to make sure that we can stagger those and bring one online and take one online as we go, so that there's minimal disruption to the summer swimming season. So with that, I plan to turn it over to Mike to talk about the community engagement process in a little more detail.
Thanks, Don. Afternoon, councilors. Mike Patton with Parks and Recreation. The goals behind the community engagement process are really to include the community and the park users in the design process, not just the neighborhood, but the community as a whole, because these parks with pools are destinations in themselves. And we hope to do that using a variety of different methods. You know, we intend to use typical town hall meetings, neighborhoods within neighborhood meetings where we gather people from, you know, a certain vicinity of the park to a local destination and talk about it. We also plan to meet with stakeholders and users of the park, have discussions with them. We'd also use an online platform to really reach out to anybody that can provide feedback through an interactive process, which the website is called Social Pinpoint. It allows us to provide surveys, gather feedback, and also an interactive mapping tool where people can really kind of design the park themselves, both spatially and through the idea process. And we think it's a way we can get the most information to help inform our designs. We want to really generate that community input and identify the programming, not just for the pools themselves, but as the park evolves over time, we want that programming to suit the neighborhood and the users, and ultimately come up with a vision plan to help guide the master planning and design process going forward. It's about a 6-month process with multiple steps. You know, we'll kick it off here in late July, where we'll, you know, finalize that schedule and outcomes that we hope to see happen, build that Social Pinpoint website, and then schedule our meetings going forward. And our first public meeting process will happen shortly after that. That's an information gathering process. That's the first blush of feedback we get from the park users in the neighborhood. And we use that information, you know, to develop our preliminary program for the park and our first conceptual layout for everything. And that will include, you know, that full range of community gathering feedback, the town hall meetings, the neighborhood meetings, the stakeholder feedback, and the website. The second touch point with the public will be after we've taken our first stab, you know, of organizing that information from the initial feedback, where we started to put pencil to paper. We've identified that program. We started to spatially lay things out a little bit. And when we touch back with them, we'll get that feedback. And did we hit the mark, right? Did we put everything where it should be? And we'll gather, you know, their feedback on our initial ideas, and then we can start to rearrange it and refine it from then. We'll touch back in later in the process where we should be getting closer to what the expectation is. And that'll be our third and sort of final round of community feedback, where the public can tell us, hey, you've hit this, or can we tweak this, can we move that? And then finally, we'll ultimately develop that vision plan, which really what it is our roadmap to make sure that we are providing the community with what they like with these projects, what they need to serve them. It needs to be a community-driven vision. It needs to be not just serve that neighborhood, but the community as a whole. It needs to be flexible. In today's construction environment, we need lots of toolbox options to deliver on what we need. And probably one of the key pieces of this whole process is establishing project budgets for each location. Part of our design team on the community engagement process will include general contractors reviewing the projects to provide firm prices. So when we go forward with that bond initiative, we're realistically promising what we can deliver. And then finally, the last touch point would be to make sure that our plans going forward with these projects are consistent with the recommendations in the system master plan. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott Russ, who's going to talk more about the benchmarking and naming study.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, councilors. As a piece of the puzzle here, I guess if you want to say, is the benchmarking and naming study. The purpose of this naming and benchmarking study is to assess the philanthropic naming opportunities of all these city-owned assets. A similar study was completed, if you remember, during the event center planning process, where we did that, where it's really mainly focused on title sponsorships and sponsorships in the facility. This study is really going to be focused more, like I said, on the philanthropic opportunities of the city-owned assets. Upon completion of the study, the city and the newly established Parks Foundation will have a better understanding of the value of all these assets and how they align with gifting opportunities to potential donors. BWF is the company that we chose for this study. They're a Minnesota-based company. They currently have a strong relationship in this market today. They work with our partners, our universities up north and south of the city here, and they have been very successful in identifying philanthropic donors for their organizations. So benchmarking, BWF is planning to utilize benchmarking in order to gain a better understanding of similar institutional practices. So BWF is going to be reaching out to 5 or 6 peer community partners, what we call peer cities. Cities like Des Moines, Boise, St. Paul, Fort Collins, with a goal to gain some insight on how these municipalities have successfully utilized the philanthropic naming opportunities to sustainably support their community. They will then again work with the city to develop a brief survey which will be sent out to these identified peer communities with qualitative and quantitative questions focused on philanthropic naming opportunities, sponsorships, cause-related marketing, and direct philanthropy. So these areas to be benchmarked will include process identifying the philanthropic naming and sponsorship opportunities, presence of philanthropic revenue and their assets, and the total amount of significant gifts that these cities receive. To enhance the survey, BWF is also planning to conduct interviews with the responding participants and ensure that the city receives the most comprehensive data possible to back their findings. Additionally, BWF will conduct a review with Sioux Falls, the city of Sioux Falls, and for this project to determine how these factors might shape fundraising opportunities. As part of that, once the inventory has been defined of the naming opportunities within the city, BWF will conduct 2 to 3 targeted focus groups where some discussions will happen and collect feedback from potential donor and sponsors and investors. These strategic discussions will then be used to gain a greater understanding of the local appetite for specific naming opportunities, donor and sponsor motivations. Upon completion of this, all of these steps, BWF plans to share their findings and the information gathered in this report, which will deliver a proposed strategy and approach for charitable naming opportunities. The report will address all of the best practices, standards to ensure consistency, tools, and processes city leadership will need to become successful. The report will include a process map to identify the philanthropic naming and sponsorship opportunities, and a threshold matrix for identifying those naming opportunities within the city. With that, I will turn it back to Don.
So part of the reason why we combined these 2 particular projects for the presentation today, even though they're somewhat related but not totally, is that we are fortunate enough to be able to have some proceeds from the Sioux Falls Park Foundation to help fund these projects. And so pleased to have Jennifer Kirby here with us today, who's chairs the new Sioux Falls Parks Foundation. And they have agreed to provide funding in the amount of $137,000 to fund fully the community engagement study and then a portion of the benchmarking and naming study that Scott just talked about. And the balance of those dollars will come from the city. They really find great value in doing this community engagement study because it really touches every part of the community and will be engaging every part of the community and really provide some good public input. But also, obviously, as a foundation, it's important to know information with regard to sponsorship and naming opportunities. And so they'll also be able to use that to match donors with projects that we have within the park system. And so I really appreciate their support. And it's really one of their first official actions as a board to help build out our park system and advance our park system. So special thanks to the foundation for their efforts to help provide the majority of the funding for both of these studies. The other thing I'd share is just next steps. We also have to have supplemental appropriations to give us the spending authority to be able to use the money because it wasn't originally budgeted. And so you'll see that on your agenda tonight. We'll go back to the park board tomorrow for their recommendation, and then we'll be doing the supplemental appropriation second reading on the 21st. And then we also will be doing the gifting agreement approval with the Community Foundation that would essentially grant those dollars to us and give those dollars for us to be able to enter into those contracts. And then one other thing that you'll see on your agenda is a CIP amendment, because currently we don't have dollars in our aquatic facilities CIP project. And so this will allow us to add funding to that project in 2022. So with that, our team's available for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Councilors, questions? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. And I know this is a real oversimplified question, but obviously we can name about anything we want at any time, I'm assuming, but this study kind of will probably do it. The study talks about, well, if you name certain things, it raises more money or it has a higher, I mean, what all exactly? I know I'm making that way too simple, but we could just go around and name anything we wanted, whatever. So what all are we finding out here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, one of the things I think that when you're working with donors, one of the things you're always asking yourself, what is the minimum? What is the threshold that you would expect to have as prior to offering up a naming opportunity? You know, is it half the cost? Is it a third of the cost? What is the magic behind that? And so that's some of what we're going to understand is that somebody may say, hey, I think, you know, this trailhead is nameable for $500,000 if it costs $1 million. And so they'll help us work through that, because one of the things we want to make sure is that we're not overpricing what those naming right opportunities are, but we're not undervalue them either, to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck as it relates to these working with these donors to advance city projects. So hopefully that helps explain.
Yeah, that makes sense. That'll be interesting to see what they come up with. I'll be real curious on some of that. So thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? Councilors? Councilor Neitzer.
Very much along the same lines as Councilor Selberg. I was wondering what when we're talking about facilities, what the scope is going to be. Are we talking about globally the entire city, like all of the assets, not just parks, or?
Yep, another great question. We're looking at all nameable assets or inventory of assets across the entire city. You know, it could be fire station, law enforcement center, library, but one of the reasons why the Park Foundation was very interested in the BWF study is that we think probably 80 to 90% of all the opportunities are going to be in the park system for the most part. So that's where we think a lot of the naming opportunities will come, but we are opening it up to all of our assets.
Okay, very good. Is this group really helping us just identify some of those opportunities and maybe what their value is, or is there also a component where they're going to be helping with fundraising and making the ask, or is that like a second step later?
Yeah, that's the second step. They're just identifying the assets, helping us to assign value, and maybe even finding opportunities that we hadn't thought of for opportunities for naming or sponsorship. But they're not actually out raising money or seeking out donors.
Is this study going to get started reasonably soon then? once
Yeah,
it's appropriated?
We intend to process these agreements simultaneously. We anticipate it's going to be more like a 12-month process, whereas the community engagement process, we anticipate to be about a 6-month process.
Okay, and finally, as it relates to the community engagement process, which I've seen them in action, they work really well. Are you going to be staggering those as you're kind of staggering your construction, kind of a deal? Or are you going to do them all kind of upfront, or, I mean,
Yeah,
things kind of,
we really need to work through that up front, because we have to be able to know what the value to assign to the bonds.
oh, sure.
And so
okay.
we have to get down the road far enough so that we have a really good idea what each site is going to cost us and what we expect to need to be able to fund all those improvements.
Got it, thanks.
You bet.
Other councilors, questions? Councilor McCarris?
My question relates to Councilor Neitzer's regard to the community engagement. My experience has been in this community engagement. The initial process is when there's really no ideas on the wall, people show up and kind of talk a little bit, and then ideas are formed, and then all of a sudden a vision is presented, and people start coming out of the woodwork at that point. And sometimes the vision's so far down the road at that point, people come out of the woodwork too late. Has anything been learned through the sustainability study or the Falls Park community engagement that you learned in those two processes that you're going to change it all in this community engagement to try to get more up front before the vision is cast?
That's a great question. I think our experience shows that it needs to be kind of a balance, because if you walk in with nothing, it can be a little hard to get started. If you walk in with too much, people will say you've already determined what this is going to look like. And so that's why we felt like it was important to have pros involved. They know our park system, they put all the data together. And I think having that independent party working with us that knows Parks and Rec inside and out and what the trends are across the country as it relates to new project development, new capital development. But it is, I think one of the things we learned with the Falls Park Master Plan is that everybody thought the competition and the winning competition was actually the plan. The reality is that they just had the best ideas. And so we were battling that a little bit. So we certainly can learn from those other master plans. And what we'll do once we have this contract in place, we'll game plan that with pros and really try to address the things that you talked about as far as too much or not enough right away.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions, councilors? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for what you and your team do with the Parks Department. It's a shining star in Sioux Falls, and we all appreciate it. Our last presentation, Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, Andy Patterson, talk about some of the good work going on down there.
Thank you. If I could ask for some technical assistance, if I have a handout, is it possible to display it?
Yes.
Okay. Is anybody available to?
Just put it on there.
Put it on there. Perfect.
All right.
Look at that.
That's easier than I thought. All right. Well, thank you. Andy Patterson with the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. Councilor Sale reached out a few weeks ago and just inquired about the One Sioux Falls Fund, and so I was happy to come and share a little bit about that. Amazingly, it's been 2 years, or over 2 years, since that whole project was started. Back in March of 2020, started with Mayor Tenhaken reaching out and saying, things are about to change, and we think that that's going to cause a lot of disruption for folks in the community. And it's certainly evolved a lot over that time period, but we did see initially a lot of folks were displaced from their work and required assistance maintaining housing, maintaining food, and so there were a lot of great community efforts. The city led the charge with $1 million contribution to this fund, and Danny Sanford added that as well. You can see on here, we had a total of over $3.4 million in contributions that were given. Those were from 525 different donors in the community. Several large donors made that up, and then there was fun neighborhood lemonade stands. Only in Sioux Falls can kids raise money 1 week from shoveling sidewalks and the next week in a lemonade stand, but that actually happened. So, but it was really neat to see this effort. This involves 7- and 6-figure gifts, and it involves $5 gifts. So it was really neighbors helping neighbors. To report on what happened, first in the bottom left corner, anytime there is a disaster, there's a group of nonprofits that constitutes the Unmet Needs Committee. And that group is getting together to decide if there's some gaps that we can close through a philanthropic response. And so you can see those organizations listed there. That group really developed a strategy. And so as the gifts started coming in, really identified they thought rental, housing assistance was going to be the hardest thing. And so you can see that each of those different columns represents a different source and probably more specifically a different nonprofit or entity that got the money out into the individuals. So the Community Foundation received those gifts. And then we really relied on that committee to help develop the policy to give it away. The Helpline Center, time and time again, proves their value to our community, and especially in these crisis times. They developed an online application process. And then the group pretty quickly identified the community outreach was best suited to help give away that rental assistance. And so over $2 million was given to individuals or to families to help stabilize their rental situation through the application process. At some point, we realized there's some folks that had some mortgage issues that were also affected. And so Lutheran Social Services gave away over $200,000 through that. Along the way, there were some unique opportunities or challenges, and Minnehaha County has a lot of those skill sets in their Human Services Department. They helped with some utility assistance. And then after we kind of wrapped up the first wave of applications, we really relied on the county to give away the housing assistance. And so a little over 664,000 was given away. Along the way, we're learning that some groups were not navigating the systems that we built, and so we worked with the South Dakota Dream Coalition, which was a group of several different nonprofits that came together that was addressing needs for some of our new Americans that were trying to navigate language issues or just concern of was this a government fund. So $250,000 was given to that group. They raised, I think, maybe $1.5 million total that they got out specifically to some of our immigrant families, those that were arriving to Sioux Falls. You'll probably remember a great effort by Feeding South Dakota and many other groups doing the food giveaways that were happening more often for a while at the fairgrounds. The One Sioux Falls Fund added $180,000 to that. And I would just add, this is essentially additional programs for all these nonprofits that stepped up. And two in particular, the Helpline Center and Community Outreach, it was a heavy toll. It was a lot of work to give that away, and so I would hold up those groups. The rest of the members beyond those two organizations suggested they each get $10,000 to help. The Community Foundation gave them some money as well, just to try to make them whole, because it was a lot of late nights and navigating processes that hadn't been existed before. So in total, the fund for the housing assistance benefited just over 4,700 families. And I can tell you, just watching applications come in, it was a real-time thing. And I had a couple afternoons where I got a little obsessed with just how fast they were coming in. And seeing the employers, these weren't folks that had traditionally been at risk before. And so I would just thank all of you the council for leading the way and stepping up. I think this is a really unique situation. A lot of communities did grants to nonprofits. This created a really great direct to the organizations that assisted. So closed, you'll see the total distributions were just under $3,357,000. We do have a balance in the fund. The reason for that, there were some uncashed checks that the Community Outreach had distributed. So once those they decided those weren't going to be utilized by families, it was returned to the fund. At some point, Minnehaha County said, we've received enough government funds that we don't need your funds anymore, so they returned a portion. And so that will reside in the fund. It will be there for a future emergency or crisis that the Unmet Needs Committee would guide when that, hopefully not soon, but, and that group checks in every so often, and so there'd be an opportunity to evaluate kind of wiping that out at some point. But we kind of wound down the giveaway process, and to start with just 59,000 wouldn't make a lot of sense at this point. So that's our report on how this is done. A huge thank you to the nonprofits in Sioux Falls that stepped up, but certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Counselor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I sure appreciate everything you and the foundation do to help with a lot of these different programs. I think my one question, you kind of hit it at the end. So is the account been pretty well stagnant now for quite a while? It's just not getting used for anything at this point? Nobody
Yeah,
can
and
come for assistance for something or other, like whatever this might be?
Actually, for quite a while. The Unmet Needs Committee wrapped up their work in about December of 2020, at which time they kind of sent all the remaining dollars to the county. The county used that, and then in 2021, they sent that back. And so we're not soliciting or collecting additional contributions at this point in time. There's no application process. It's kind of closed and held for the next crisis at this point.
Okay. And did you say 4,700 families it helped?
Yes.
Is there like an average size gift between everything? Did that ever get averaged out? Or is it so all over in different things that it's hard to?
It varied a lot, and I should remember some of the guidelines. It's been a couple of years, but there were some limits as to how much they would help in any one situation. I can't tell you the average. They did do multiple rounds for some families that continued to demonstrate the need.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Other council questions? Councilor McCarris.
Yeah, just one quick comment for full disclosure purposes. I was serving on the One Sioux Falls Committee as a representative of Empower Sioux Falls. So on this issue, I won't speak from the council perspective, but happy to answer any questions at any point as we look back and so forth.
Yep. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate your role on that committee too.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I just have a few. I do kind of apologize to my fellow council members that I haven't followed up to get this report sooner. I knew it was out there. I just needed, it worked in very nicely with the presentations today. And I wish that there was a way that I could personally thank all 525 donors for what they've done for this community, because it's brought us through a crisis that would have been astronomical more than it was if this group wouldn't have, and the donors and the people wouldn't have come forward. So thank you very much for what you've done. Thank you much for all the hard work that you've done. Seeing no other comments, this time,
Thank you.
go. Thank you, Andy. Then we'll go into public comment. This time, anybody has up to 5 minutes to speak on any of the 3 presentations done.
Scott Harrisman, Sioux Falls. I'm still confused about the golf licensing. I didn't really understand how that works. As I understood it, the pavilion bought their liquor license and then they can do whatever they want to with the profits, but it kind of sounds like we're just kind of giving them the liquor license. Hopefully that'll be explained better at the meeting. I don't want to say anything that I don't know. But if that's the case, the city should be taking all of the profits from the liquor sales. I mean, they have costs associated with that they can, use money for, but any profits should go directly to the city. I don't know why we would let anybody, a private contractor, because that's what they are, just like the pavilion, use a liquor license for free. Makes no sense. As for this aquatic thing, how many studies have we done? I mean, really? We need to do more studies? We know where we need the pools. We've known for years. I've been watching this before the Midco and before all that. We should have built the pool out at Sanford Sports Complex. That would have made the most sense. I wonder how much money we're losing every year on that. Is we ever going to get a number, how much we're throwing at that place every year? I don't understand why we got to keep doing studies. You know where the pools need to be built. Put the plans out, have a public meeting, one public meeting, come to the meeting if you live in the neighborhood, and figure out what you're going to do. It sounds like to me, looking at this donors for parks, which I find to be incredibly bizarre, but when you look at it, it's pretty clear what it is. It's a certain group of people started this private nonprofit or whatever the heck it is to determine, the people who have the money are going to determine what these parks are going to be because they're the donors. We saw that with the ice ribbon. You don't know how many people have said to me, why are we building an ice ribbon there? Who's going to use that? I have people in the public all the time, why are we building an ice? I said, well, we didn't make up that decision. A rich donor did. A rich donor came to the city and said, you're going to build an ice ribbon and you're going to pay for the half of it. We're paying for more than half of it now. But why are we letting a bunch of donors decide what's going on in our parks? This is public property. The taxpayers fund this stuff. You can put up 10 million signs, Hy-Vee, whatever, billion automotive, whatever you want to do. I don't care. But the taxpayers are the ones that be determining what's going on in these parks, not donors. We have an incredible bike trail system. I got to tell you, the Family Park Edition is wonderful, except for the big mud pit when you get off the trail to the thing. Some bad engineering going on there. But it's 32 miles. I rode it on Sunday. If you get off at the country club and go to Family Park and come back, that's 10 miles. So it's 32 miles, the whole thing. It's wonderful. It's a good addition. This is what we should be concentrating on in this city. Stuff that's free to people, stuff that we are paying for already out of our tax dollars, and not have a bunch of rich donors telling us what we're going to do with our parks and have a bunch of stupid signage up everywhere. One more thing. The rental assistance. During the campaigns, I heard a lot of talk about childcare, and I would just scratch my head because everyone, well, how are we going to solve this problem? Well, this thing called pre-K. If you would actually accept money from the federal government, it would trickle down from peer, and you'd be able to help a lot of kids. But nobody ever brought that up. Same way with the rental assistance. How many millions and millions and millions of dollars was the Nome administration sitting on for rental assistance and housing assistance? She gave it back. She sent it back to Washington. Why? Why wasn't anyone from the city, any city in this state, not just Sioux Falls, why weren't you all in the municipal league getting together and saying, why are you giving that money back? You just showed us we had a need. We know we have a need in this town. Housing. And we gave millions and millions and millions, and nobody said a word. Nobody from Rapid City said a word. Nobody from Sioux Falls. Nobody from Aberdeen. Just send it back. It's baffling to me. There's simple solutions to things if you would just work, if you'd work with the feds once in a while.
Anyone else for public input? Counselor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd make a motion to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing information listed in subdivisions 127.1.58 and 127.1.517 pursuant to SDCL 12526.
Is there a second?
Second, Nitzert.
Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Council members Barranco,
Yes.
Pohl,
Yes.
Jensen,
Yes.
McCoris,
Yes.
Nitzert,
Yes.
Selberg.
Yes.
Sale.
Yes,
Star.
Yes.
that motion's passed 8-0. At this time, please clear the chambers. We'll go into executive session.